And we're live. Welcome everybody to the first dance talk in 2016. Today we are happy to have Ari Bader-Natal as our speaker, and Ari is the principal learning architect at the Minerva Project, and he's responsible for designing new technologies to support teaching and learning at the Minerva schools and KGI. Today he's going to talk about supporting and assessing classroom discussions in an active learning seminar. He's going to tell us what he understands by active learning using the example of the Active Learning Forum. For the first time, you also have the chance to participate live in this Hangout. So if you're watching this now, you can click at the link in the comment section or in the mail that you received on the mailing list. So you can participate here with audio and video and talk to us during this, this stream. But of course, you can still do it in the traditional way and submit your questions during the talk using the Q&A tool. So without further ado, we should go right into the talk. Before we start, Carolyn, I'm sure, wants to say a few words.
Yeah, I just want to add my welcome to all of us. We're excited about this next year of this dance community with the talk series and also continued partnership with edX and the development work that Oliver reported on in the email that he sent out. And I just want to say I've known Ari for a long time now, several years. He's been active in the community of intelligent support for group learning and has been doing cutting edge work in that area, and now he is starting this very innovative online learning program, which he'll be talking about today. I heard about it when we were together at a workshop at Stanford sometime in the recent past, and it sounded extremely exciting and valuable for this community. So I'm really looking forward to Ari's presentation, and I encourage the audience to be very active in submitting questions because Ari especially really likes a lot of audience participation. So now I'll hand it over to Ari.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to share a little bit about what we're doing. So I'm the principal learning architect at Minerva Project. We are building the Minerva schools at KGI, which is a 4-year undergraduate program. We are in our first full year now. We had a small founding class of about 28 students last year, and we have around 110 or so students this year. And they all live in San Francisco. So the first thing that I should say is, in terms of context, this is not a MOOC. So I think that there are some interesting things that, hopefully, that make this relevant and interesting for this group. But I think the change that you'll need to do in terms of understanding what I'm presenting is, I think the reference point should be a university. Picture a university in your mind. Don't picture a MOOC in your mind for the starting point. And I think that should be helpful. So I did put together a few slides, but what I think will be most interesting is to share a little bit about what our classroom looks like, because a lot of the interesting work that we've been doing has been, basically we have an idea for what the education is that we wish to provide, and a lot of the technology that we built was working backwards from that to what would need to be in place in order to do that. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but let me see if I can turn on my screen share here. Okay, so do you see my screen, or am I sharing the wrong screen here?
Yes. It's good. I can see it.
Okay, so I just put together a few slides, but hopefully this is a useful starting point for some of the discussion. So, so as I was saying, I think a useful reference point is traditional university, and we're thinking about how we might rethink how you structure a university if you're starting today, essentially. And there are a number of components to that. I personally most involved in sort of the intersection of the curriculum and the technology. But we do have our students live in San Francisco their first year, but they don't stay in San Francisco. And part of the idea is that we have a number of cities around the world that students are going to be living in. The first year is in San Francisco. Next year they'll be in Berlin in the fall and Buenos Aires in the spring. And then semesters following, Seoul, Bangalore, London, Istanbul. So the first question is sort of how can you have students who are traveling around the world during their four-year program and essentially sort of where other universities may have a notion of study abroad. This is something that sort of takes that to the extreme, where students are always sort of abroad. And really part of what makes this possible is that our classroom is not a physical room. It's a space that we've been designing and building very intentionally online. And I'll show, so I think most of the discussion will be sort of around what that looks like and how we've gone about designing that, decisions that have gone into that, and then hopefully aspects of that that are of interest to this community. So for starters, this is not what the classes look like. This is not the vision of technology and education. What we're talking about more is I pulled a couple of slides here, but these are some of our students from last year. And really what we're talking about is still a small seminar, but this the context for this is happening, it's a digital space. So we have this video that I'll show bits and pieces of as we go. I might sort of pop out to show that now. But really, one of the challenges for me is trying to share what the Minerva classroom looks like without actually showing it. So I think the best thing that we've sort of come up with is to actually show this. So what I'll do is tell me. Let's see. So is this working full screen?
I can see it full screen. Yes.
Great. Okay. So I'll skip through this. This is the video that there's a link to this video on the talk page. And so for anyone who's listening, who's interested in seeing really the full thing, that's the place to see it, because the video will be jittery if I try and play the full thing back now. So I'll just sort of hit some highlights as we're going, and hopefully this is going to be helpful for some context. So this is some of our students from last year in the founding class. And this is Vicki Chandler, our Dean of Natural Sciences. And what we're showing here is going to be a class that she's teaching and just giving you a sense of what this looks like. So Hazik was the first student, Guillaume is the second, who is in this video. And so I'll pause this for a second. So this is sort of where we were before. So these students are, many of them are in the residence hall, but not all of them. Hazik, you saw, was in a coffee shop, and I think Vicki is teaching this class from her home. It is typical that many students are in the residence hall, but many are also on the road, whether it's in a coffee shop or out of town at a conference, things like that. The faculty live all over the world, so they're all teaching from home. Most are in the U.S., not all. These are a number of the students from our founding class. Feel free to interrupt me anytime, but I'll move this ahead a little bit. So you can see it's a different sort of thing than a Google Hangout. First of all, in that it's not just that there's one person who you're looking at who's on stage. For different types of discussions in class, we'll rearrange what this layout looks like in order to sort of, as best we can, support the type of interaction that's going on here. So let me go a little bit further.
While you're zooming ahead, I guess one thing that makes this almost MOOC-like is that the teachers are not, even though the students are together, but the teachers are all over the world, which means that students don't have that one-on-one contact with their teachers. They can't go to office hours. They don't really know their teacher in like their everyday lives. Have you gotten any feedback on this, and what ways have you found to support the kind of teacher-student bonding, as it were?
Yeah, so the faculty do hold office hours, and they have that on their calendar, and students do drop in. And some of those are for one-to-one meetings, and some of them are for open office hours. They each handle it differently in terms of which days of the week they schedule, how many hours and which formats. But those office hours often those also happen on this platform. So this sort of layout here with sort of a two-up view is look like there wouldn't obviously be anyone else in the room. So you can see other people at the top. That is, I think the students do, I mean, it's really a question for them. My sense is that they do feel that they know the faculty. The faculty come in to San Francisco. They've come in a few times, and certainly whenever they're in town, they meet with the students. There are a few who are local, but in general, yeah. I mean, they're all over. They are and will continue to be all over the world. So I don't. I think the challenge is more understanding how tall someone is, but not whether or not you feel that that you have the connection and you know them. So the classes meet for each class meets for 2 hour-and-a-half sessions per week, and they're heavily discussion oriented. So everyone is everyone does know their professor. All the professors know their students well. So in that sense, the reference point is really a small seminar.
Can you talk a little bit about how the whole class discussions are managed?
Sure. So I can get to that in a bit. So here's an example. So here's here's a poll question she asked. This was set up ahead of time. She knew she was going to be asking this based on sort of the lesson plan that she was working from, and the students each clicked in their answers, and you can see who answered what. And it is very common to ask, we'll do peer instruction questions at the beginning of the class, but what will generally happen from this, is something like this, where then the professor will call on some students who had different responses. So she knows at this point that Joy and that Tana had different answers to this question, and so she'll pull the two of them up and use that as a basis for where the discussion goes. So that's something where sort of this bit of feedback of sort of putting the question out there helps structure where she takes the conversation next. Often what would follow that would be, let me see if we have one. I think we do in a bit. Small breakout groups that'll follow that up. Let me see if okay. So I can pause this for a second here. So I love to find. Okay, this is different. I'll come back to this. Okay, let me see if I can answer that. So you were saying, okay, so here was the example that we were just looking at. Let me make this a little bit larger. Sorry about that. Okay, so these are a couple screenshots that I took from the video earlier. But yeah, okay, so maybe you can. Do you mind asking that again?
Yes. Ooh, there's an echo. Maybe while I'm phrasing my question, you could mute so that we don't have this echo.
Sure.
So I guess what I'm curious about is really, I'm very curious always about how online discussions are managed. So there's the whole class discussion, which you're starting to show, and I love how the teacher has the option of kind of highlighting a couple of different students in the group, but the other students are still very present there in the discussion. But I'm wondering, you did mention something also about sort of breakout groups, and I'm curious about how that happened, or sort of ongoing collaborative projects between students. Do they happen online? And if so, how are you supporting those? And also, in terms of any kind of problem-based learning that happens in the classes where there's persistent collaborative groups, but at certain times the teacher has a supportive role to play, how do you coordinate that interaction and mentoring that happens?
Sure. So I can say a few things. I'm trying to think what would be helpful and not distracting for me to pull up on screen while I'm talking about this. Maybe I'll go back to here. So let's see. So what we're looking at right here is a breakout group. So midway through class, the professor will ask a poll question, different students answer, respond to the poll question, and basically there are a few things that the professor can do with that, and one of those is basically start a breakout session where students are grouped such that within each group there are a mix of different answers to that poll question. And so the idea of that is to, rather than putting everyone who answered one thing in one group and everything who answered another thing in another group, this is trying to, create as best we can sort of lively discussion in each one of these groups. And the professor then is able to drop into any one of these groups. And I don't have any screenshots of that here. But basically they have a bird's eye view of all the different sessions that are in progress right now, and they can see essentially a snapshot of what we're looking at like this, but for each of these groups in parallel, and then can listen in, drop in, participate in the discussions, things like that. So that's one form of what might happen sort of on a micro level inside of the classroom. I think you're also asking about ongoing projects that are group projects. So that's definitely a thing. Last semester, in the spring semester, the final projects were all small group projects. And a lot of the collaboration among students happened in person because they live together in residence halls. But the iteration on sort of the feedback, the drafts that they submitted to the faculty, to their professors, and the feedback that they got was sort of asynchronous online. Let's see. I mean, there are a number of activities. So for each of the cities that students spend time in, we are building out a network of basically, the goal is to turn that city into their campus without us building an entire campus there. And a lot of that has to do with developing partnerships in the city for sort of building out the network that students can rely on while they're in that city. And one of the threads there is to create sort of schedule of co-curricular activities that we've designed specifically with people in each of these cities, and sometimes students have been doing group work associated with that. We have a notion of location-based assignments that last semester, this semester, students are doing one of these in each one of their 4 courses, where they're basically applying what they've been learning in the classes to some self-designed project that's specific to the city that they're living in. And I think those have been individual projects. But so basically, I think I'm trying to give sort of a broader picture of the different types of, in terms of academic activities, projects, what that looks like beyond just discussion that's happening in class or assignments that students are, completing and turning in. So there is, I think, a wide variety on that front. In terms of facilitating discussion, I think one important thing to know is that students are assessed on what they actually say during the class sessions. And I'll show in a minute how we go about doing that. But one of the main things that comes out of that is that students need to participate in the discussion in order to be assessed. If they're sit there silently, you're essentially not you're not getting graded for that. And so one of the pieces that comes out of that is for the faculty, for the professor who's teaching the class, it's important for them to give each student an opportunity to participate in the discussion. And so one thing that's challenging about that is how do you keep track of who has and hasn't been participating today? You could jot down notes on paper, or you could try to rely on your memory, things like that. So one thing that we did was this. Here is there's a button that the professor can hold down on their keyboard while during class, at any point during class, and the video streams at the top are color-coded based on who has, based on how much time each student's been talking so far today relative to the other students. So you can see who you haven't pulled into the conversation yet, or who hasn't volunteered to be in it. And this is, I think, the idea is providing useful feedback to the professor on who to draw into the discussion. So hopefully that speaks to, in one way. I could talk a little bit about what that assessment and classroom discussion looks like, if that's of interest.
Actually, I have another question,
yeah.
And that is that, so I understand that why the courses have to be taught online, since the teachers are not in the same city always with the students who are enrolled, but since they're all in that city, then why was it better to have the students not in the same place? I mean, you could imagine the students all together in a room, and the only person who's connecting in is the teacher. But then the students would be in the same room with each other. What was the advantage to having the students all distributed if they're all in the same city?
So they're not always all in the, they're not necessarily in the same city. Well, so each student during their 4 years travels through 7 different cities, and so any particular course that we offer can have students in each of those different cities in the same class. So all our classes are between 15 and 19 students, but those 15 students could be in 6 different cities. It is one. And then the next piece is that the students don't have to be in the residence hall in order to do this. Earlier in the video we saw Hazik, or maybe, yeah, in this one Hazik is in the coffee shop right here. We've had students who've done a lot of traveling during the year, whether that's for conferences or competitions or things like that, and they've been able to do that without missing classes. Last year, the first week of the spring semester, many students hadn't their travel plans were such that students were taking classes from 7 different countries. And that's really only possible, in this mode. But yeah, I mean, in general, what we did do is we got fantastic. The goal was to get fantastic internet in the residence hall, so it's sort of certain to work well there. And when you venture out, it's harder to know if the bandwidth and network quality is going to be what you need. And so students have been, among other things, sort of crowdsourcing a map of places around the city that they've taken classes where it's worked well. And so they have sort of that as a reference point as they sort of travel around the city. So I think part of it is that some of what we're able to do here, we're only able to do because everyone is online. And I think something like who's participated how much, or to do breakout groups based on who answered what to a particular question. There are a lot of things that you could theoretically do in a room in person, but the sort of coordination piece, whether that's rearranging where everyone's sitting, or the keeping track of who's talked how much, or various other things that that are easy to calculate automatically are much more difficult to do on paper. So you could, I'm sure you could try to replicate everything that we're doing in a physical classroom, and I think it would just be very challenging. The way we do assessment, I think, would be another one that I'll show this, and maybe it'll give a sense of why this would be much more. I don't know how we would go about doing this piece if we weren't doing it in this setting. So basically, each class is, this full screen video is recorded, and students have access to that video recording afterwards to come back to. And the faculty have access to it also. And when the faculty, what they do is within, in the days following the class, the faculty go back, the professor goes back and watches the video recording of the class. And the goal is to give each individual student feedback on what they contributed to the class, and to assess each student against the rubric of the learning outcomes that basically what we're teaching during the first year, and giving student feedback on the rubrics for each one of those learning outcomes, which we call habits of mind and foundational concepts. And I'll show what that looks like in a minute. But basically, the way that we do that, here's let's see. I think let me switch back to the video because I think it'll be easier to see there. Okay, so here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what we're looking at now is the view that a professor sees after they finish, after the class is over and they're going back to assess students on it. So in the middle here, we have that video of what we were seeing full screen when we were in the room, but what's wrapped around that is this tool for providing feedback. So this is below the video. We have a transcript that's automatically generated of everything that happened during the class. So here Guillaume was speaking. It doesn't actually, there's no speech-to-text of the words that he was saying, but we have marked that it's at this moment in the video, 14:16, that he was speaking, and he spoke for 18 seconds. And this transcript, everything below this video here, is automatically generated based on events that happened during the class session. So that's another thing that I don't know how you would go about doing during a class. But then what that means is these are anchor points that we can attach assessments to. And if we, on the right hand here, attach an assessment to this highlighted element in this transcript, that then he's the one who will see that feedback, and that'll go into the sort of assessment database for him. And so that's something that we can do automatically based on, given that we knew who was speaking when and who was chatting when, all the things that were happening during the class, that then is structured data that we can attach assessments to. So what we'll see here is the professor starts typing in at the right some written feedback that on what it was that Guillaume was saying here. The second thing is that we have, this is the particular learning outcome that was the focus of the class for the day. They have access to all of them. There are a little bit over 100 of them that are introduced throughout the core, the 4 cornerstone courses in the first year. But we sort of shortlist the one that we knew was the topic of the discussion for the day. And then here is the rubric for assessing that particular learning outcome. So for right problem, we have this 5-point rubric, and so then the professor clicks that in, and here this is essentially the assessment that gets recorded. And when Guillaume goes back into this video, he only sees the assessments that were left for him. Obviously, he's not seeing other people's assessments, but he's able to view those in the context of the individual comments that he saw. So he would click on this assessment on the right, it would jump the video to that moment, it would jump the timeline to that moment, and he would be able to see that feedback in context.
I think this assessment piece is really extremely interesting, and it seems very unique because you don't even get that much detailed feedback on class participation in a small in-person class at a typical university. That seems extremely innovative there, and also potentially challenging to scale unless it could be automated. So this might be a good place to start to reflect with you about the role of technology in supporting all this? And also, even what is it that you're trying to achieve through this feedback? Of course, we all believe that feedback is always valuable to students, and yet, usually typical instruction doesn't involve this level of feedback on class participation. So can you talk about what's most important that you want students to get out of this feedback, why it was so important to build this into the program as a central component, but then also what aspects you think potentially could be automated?
Yeah, happy to. So what I would say is I would say it's less about assessing students on class participation as much as assessing them on what they're able to demonstrate in in this sort of spoken rather than written form. And so a lot of students these are not lectures. Students are doing the reading and all the work ahead of time. And so what's happening during these sessions is students exercising what they've been learning. And so we do see it as sort of a place that we're able to give them feedback on what they're demonstrating that that they have or haven't mastered. The idea is that if the feedback loop is fast enough that essentially they get the feedback before the next class session meets, that it can be sort of this constant, the formative feedback can really help them improve over the course of the semester. And our focus really is on formative feedback as opposed to summative feedback. So I think if there were aspects of this that we could automate, that would certainly be interesting. I think the question would be, first of all, are the assessments as accurate? And second of all, are the students getting as much value out of seeing the feedback from it? And if those two things were the case, then it would certainly make sense to go further into that. I think what this feeds into is, and one of the reasons that we're doing this, let me jump ahead here, is this idea that the primary things, what we're trying to teach is we're trying to teach critical thinking. And that is a sort of big phrase that it's hard to tell, what exactly someone means when they say that. So we try to break this down, and we break it down further to the point that we have this. What we're looking at here is a screenshot of, I lost my mouse, a tree, basically a tree structure where we take critical thinking and break it down into its component parts. And for each one of these, we have essentially near the bottom of the page, what you see is the individual assessments from this student on this particular learning outcome. And so basically we have this time series of assessment data points that were taken from not just one class session, but different classes, different courses, different days, different semesters, but all assessments of the student on this same habit of mind or foundational concept. And the reason that we're tracking this across courses and over time is that ultimately what we care about is what the student has mastered and what they're able to transfer into new contexts when they graduate and leave Minerva, and not what they're able to show on the final exam on the last day of the semester. And so for that reason, all the assessments that we're doing cut across courses and cut across semesters, across years. And really the question is, if we're to look at where is the student at the moment that, where they are when they graduate, we're taking the data at that point, that assessment, and we're projecting that backwards and using that as what their first year grades are. So everything that we're teaching in terms of these foundational concepts and habits of mind, we're introducing in the first year. And the grades that you get on those courses that they're introduced on is based on what you've demonstrated, master, and transfer on at the time that you graduate, and not just on the last day of that semester. And so that's, I think, a very unusual thing. Now, there clearly are, for once you've selected a major and a concentration, or you're working on a capstone project in your fourth year, you will be, there are content-focused learning outcomes, obviously things you need to learn for a course that are not general habits of mind. And those don't cut across courses or semesters, but sort of this foundation of how we've sort of broken down critical thinking into its component parts, that we want to see that students, it's first introduced their first year, but they continue to build on it over all 4 years at Minerva.
So this seems incredibly exciting. So, and I completely respect and understand your hesitation to think that you would ever sort of replace the feedback that you're getting from the human instructors. And I think in the case where scaling isn't, a real problem, then obviously it's better to have feedback from a teacher. But I'm just thinking in terms of being able to apply this approach, say, in a MOOC context where there's so many more students, and I'm trying to think what from this really beneficial kind of interaction could actually be applied in that context. It would almost necessitate some kind of automated support, of which, of course, there's a question about whether that's feasible. But it does appear to me that even just the platform as it stands, you are collecting very rich data of student interactions where, interestingly, because the students are distributed, you've got their voices on separate channels, which is always ideal from a standpoint of the data and being able to analyze it, and yet they're interacting with each other, which makes it very rich. And then you get this great feedback annotated by instructors who are very invested in offering really detailed, good mentoring based on, this kind of jointly held set of values that your program represents. So one thing I wonder is, do you plan to do something with this amazing goldmine of data, or have you thought about potentially, even hiring students as interns even, or people who might want to collaborate on the analysis of this data?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly open to all of those things. We have a number of students who are doing internships with us now who are, and I can think of at least one who the focus of the internship has been on data analysis of the habits of mind and foundational concepts, how students have been learning that. We haven't, there were a number of students who did internships over the summer where they were reviewing the classes from last year. So last year was, this founding class of 28 students who are heavily involved in shaping and providing feedback. And so we did a lot of iteration over the summer before designing the courses for this year, and they were involved in that in a number of ways. But in terms of researchers getting involved, it's certainly something that we're open to. I think more than anything else, we're just constrained by time and all the things that we wish were already done that we want done as soon as possible. So that, I think, time has been the primary constraint on that. It's really the reason that we haven't published any of this yet. But I think, I do think that a lot of what we're doing is interesting, and some of it is novel. I think really it's just we've been backing into it from the, what is it that we want students to walk away with, and what's the best way that we can help them learn that? How do we, best teach that, and what technologies need to be in place in order to support that, both the teaching and the learning? So I would say, yes, I'm certainly open to talking. The students have access to their own data. They have access to the videos, the class sessions that they were in. They also, at the end of last semester, last spring, I didn't do it for last semester, gave them different tools for exploring their own assessment data. One was essentially, I didn't get as far as building out an API for accessing it, but I did sort of collect into a CSV for each student every piece of assessment data that they received over the course of the year. And that was by a request from one of the students who was interested in doing his own analysis on it. So that was on an individual student having access to their own data, which is different than obviously the data across all the students. And then another essentially interactive explorer that they could download and export. for all the written feedback, all the written feedback that they received from their professors. So those things, that's sort of the starting point. The starting point was giving students the benefit of access to that data in a more usable form, for analysis or reflection. But in terms of looking across, we're certainly interested in doing that, looking across, what's working. I mean, clearly, we have multiple sections of each course because we've put a cap on how many students can be in any individual section, but every student is taking the same 4 core courses their first year. And so, it's sort of the perfect design for randomized controlled experiments on differences in how we structure some of the individual class sessions, or maybe which examples or topics we address, things like that. But yeah, I mean, we do have the individual audio clips, we have or the video clips. We have these markers to moments in the video, and we know who's talking when. But another thing that I should point out is that you'll see some of what we see on this transcript is it says here I'll pull up, the professor can open up their sidebar, and there are various things that they can click on to pull up, to pull onto stage, some slides or the notes from one of the breakout groups or a new Google Doc or things like that. And obviously, anytime you click one of these things, we're generating a record that's going into that transcript also. So we know what resources were pulled into different classes. But we also know, this is probably the most interesting piece, we know what the lesson plan for the class is ahead of time. We know what it is that the professor is going to be spending their time talking about. And this, I think, is interesting. I think might be interesting and relevant with respect to the orchestration discussions that I know you guys had in the previous talk. In that, what we found, so we came at it from a different perspective, which is it can be challenging to teach a class and also manage a live stage production here, which is essentially what you're doing when you're rearranging. And so the idea of navigating all these menus while you're trying to teach a class is something that we really wanted to try to figure out how to avoid. And the best solution that we've come up with so far is we know what the lesson plan for the class is ahead of time. So basically what we can do is we can organize all these different resources in the order that we know we're going to be using them. So we moved to a different model, which is essentially here on the right is essentially a timeline of all the different pieces, all the different things that are going to come up during this class session. And but inside of each one of these is what's packed into that is sort of the macro of 5 other different settings for how many people in a breakout group and who to assign in the group and what the prompt is when they're in the group and things like that. And so that's something that, just by a single click of the button, the entire interface rearranges in the way that we knew ahead of time we wanted to, but then it both reduces the cognitive load on the professor as they're teaching and lets them focus more on leading and moderating the discussion rather than navigating a GUI interface. And here's a screenshot I took this morning of one from a class that ran on Monday. So this is just the sidebar piece. But as they go through, they still have the sort of their notes on the individual lesson plan that they're talking about. But this is sort of an executable version that as they're going through, they're able to see, things like if they have a notion of how they want it to pace it, how are they doing on that. But also, each one of these things saves them a whole lot of clicks in terms of navigating their way through that. So I think this struck me as sort of interesting and relevant in that this is sort of our notion of orchestrating what happens in a live class, but that also means that each one of these, this is all structured data that we have associated with the class. So we know essentially what the topics were that were discussed in each point in the class, which is more than even just this piece of who's talking when. Because we know who's talking when, but we also know what's going on in the class at this point. So it is when we get to the point of diving into the analysis, it is a very rich, there's a lot that we know about what's going on here. And the goal, really, I think the goal is that what's driving the analysis is something that's either improving the feedback that we provide to the professor on, how they can, what information we could provide to them that would help them better do what they're trying to do, or feedback we provide directly to the student on, here are some, there are all different directions it could go, but I think what would definitely drive it out in terms of how we would approach it is, how would this improve the learning experience for the student, or for the the teaching experience for the professor, and that would be, I think, probably the starting point for how we would approach the data analysis there.
Yeah, actually, that gives me another idea of what would be an exciting thing to do with this data, which would be to model how the choices that instructors made in the facilitation, or because even if your interface is set up to reduce their cognitive load and being able to orchestrate the groups and the discussion, they're still making choices as part of that. And I could imagine that different ones of your instructors have different strategies for moving through that. And since you have the detailed assessment information week by week, you can see the growth that students are going through in one class versus another class, and you might even be able to identify what are those strategies that teachers are using or not that are influencing the trajectory of growth that students are going through. So even if you didn't automate the assessment itself, since you have those assessments in there and you can model student growth as it relates to these experiences that they get in the classes, especially because there's 4 classes they're all taking together, so then you can observe them in the different contexts with the different instructors. It just seems incredibly rich from the standpoint of understanding the impact of different facilitation choices on growth.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot. I mean, we also know, like, if you look at the bottom part of the screenshot, we know, each time a student is assessed on something, what the context was, what the class was, or which assignment it was. So I can imagine you could learn something about a particular class session, and the question is, to what extent is that a reflection on the lesson plan versus to what extent is it a reflection on the professor who is moderating, who is teaching that individual class session. And given that there are multiple professors teaching the same class session, presumably you'd be able to see something there, or to tease those apart. Because really, I mean, we're trying to iterate, we're trying to improve on all aspects of this. If we see ways that we can improve on the lesson plan, the course design, there's a team who would be thrilled to get that feedback. If there are ways that we can learn about what techniques for leading the class or moderating the discussion, or classroom management issues, things like that, that we can see particular strengths in terms of how that plays out in terms of student learning gains on these individual habits of mind and foundational concepts. That for the faculty who are teaching classes could be incredibly useful. And then for the students themselves, what could they learn from, what are ways that we can look at this data, approach this data, and draw something from it that has some direct benefit to them. So for the time being, on that front, we've sort of left that in sort of the most raw form of they have access to the videos, they have access to these assessments, they have access to machine readable versions of this data if they want to do that assessment analysis themselves. But obviously that's asking a lot. There are students who did that. There are students who started doing that before we even provided them the data, so that was an interesting challenge. But it's a group of students who are very, very interested in understanding what's going on, learning how to better learning about what's working well here and where there's space for improvement. I mean, we get a huge amount of useful feedback from the students on ways where they see opportunities for us to improve on what we're doing or how we're doing it.
So I could go on asking questions forever, but I want to make sure that if students have or participants that are watching remotely, if they've submitted questions. Oliver, have any questions come through from the audience?
No, we don't have any questions so far.
Okay, great. So we are just in the last 5 minutes. So again, I could ask more questions, Ari, but if you had more material, I don't want to interrupt you.
I don't, I think the best thing I can do is just try to, talk about what's most interesting or relevant to you guys. So but that's sort of all I sort of came in with in terms of to show off. Let me see if there's anything else in the video that I should bring up. But I think we probably even got near the end of the video, which would be great.
My two remaining questions, maybe you could just pick one of them,
Sure.
are one is what kind of support do you envision would be useful for students in helping them to reflect meaningfully on the feedback that they're getting? So do you think it's just self-explanatory? Do you think helping them figure out how to move on from that or make decisions from the feedback that they're getting, is that an opportunity for technology support? And the other question is, since this is such a different way of running a university program, I'm wondering if you had to offer the students any kind of particular onboarding process to help them get oriented so that they knew what to expect, so that they knew how to cope with this very different kind of college experience.
Yeah, so both interesting questions. I would say, in terms of, let me see if I can even turn off screen sharing. And let me see if I can find the Hangout. Okay, am I on?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so we've done a few things in terms of, there's definitely some summer prep work that students do before they arrive at Minerva. It's obviously a very unusual program, and it attracts a group of students who are particularly interested in that program and this design. And so students know what they're getting into. I hope they know what they're getting into ahead of time. But yeah, I mean, there's an orientation week, and part of that is devoted to, some of it is like, clearly you're in San Francisco and let's learn how to navigate San Francisco, but a lot of it is we're doing things in a very different way. Classes, what a class looks like, how you engage, what's expected of you. These things are all different. So that's certainly a part of the orientation process. And we try to do that as much as we can, as early as possible. We have this weekend we have students who had applied, who were accepted to Minerva Early Decision for next fall, who are coming to visit for sort of our visiting weekend, and we're trying to convey as much of that as we can during that weekend, just because so they get a flavor of it. Because I think on the one hand it's different, but on the other hand I think it can be very interesting and exciting. So you also asked about giving student support on how to analyze this data or what to make of it. And I think I flashed on the screen for a second what one of the term reports looks like, which you're able to see could be a very detailed view of their progress on the. Let me see if I can pull this up again. Very detailed view on their progress on each of the habits of mind and foundational concepts that was introduced in that course. This is a fake one. This is not really someone's transcript or someone's term report. But on each one of these, if you click in, it jumps to that detail page that we were looking at before. If you, on that detail page, what I didn't show you was, where was it? Oops. On the page where, here we go. On the page where students see their scores on each of these, if you click in, it'll open up the video to that moment in the video where you were assessed on it with that bit of feedback. Or for the assignment, it'll scroll down to the paragraph on page 2 where you got that feedback, that assessment there. So I think the first part was just to give you a path from from some sort of aggregate statistics on how you're doing on something down to the individual assessments and clicking through to the specific pieces of either what you wrote or what you said that were the basis for that assessment. And that works its way all the way back up to this term report. So when you get this PDF at the end of the semester and you click through, you can click through all the way down to what you said on the 3rd week of class. So I think it could be useful to provide some more context to students on how to interpret this or what to do with it. I think the starting point was just to surface it so they had access to it at all, and then we'll build on that over time.
Well, this is incredibly exciting, and I'm so glad that you came and took the time out to share with us this very innovative program that you have going, and we'll be excited to see how it develops going forward. And boy, would I love to get my hands on that data. Anyway,
okay, well, let's talk, because I know this is we're certainly open to that, and I think it's just a matter of timing and things like that. So I'm certainly interested to talk about that with you more. Thank you for having me here today, and apologies for throwing a twist in the format that you guys have used.
No problem. I think it worked. Yeah, I'm sure if anything, the only issue is whether people get tired of hearing my voice. But anyway, thank you so much again, and I'm glad that this will be a resource for our dance community. So we'll keep in touch. See you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
So